All right, you ready?
Yep.
All right. Thank you for joining me today on the podcast, on the Conversation podcast with me, Luis. So we have today Romi Saleh out of New Jersey. He's a general practitioner, which practices family law and litigation. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me. I know we haven't been able to touch base, and because of this situation, I think this is probably the best way that we can actually connect.
Yeah, especially with things that are going on today with the coronavirus and the craziness that comes with it.
So speaking about craziness, how are things going on over there? Because you're in New Jersey right now, correct?
Yeah, New Jersey, especially North Jersey, got hit pretty hard early on. It's still getting hit pretty hard early on. Everything just kind of happened so quickly with businesses shutting down, hospitals getting overwhelmed, people rushing to the supermarkets, finding the supermarkets empty. It's just something that's truly unprecedented for everybody, and it's affecting everybody at every level. We've never seen anything like this ever.
That is true. So, what kind of you said so it kind of hit everybody pretty hard. I'm assuming it hit your business pretty hard as well, right? Or can you?
Well, right off the,
Yeah, go
mhm.
ahead. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So right off the bat, it's first and foremost, people are losing their jobs left and right.
Yep.
Either furloughed or unemployed, and that has had a severe impact on various types of matters. Whether you're talking about a divorce and then suddenly somebody's unemployed, and now all the numbers that you're trying to calculate now is just not. You just kind of have to repivot the position um, and then see where it goes. People losing their jobs and not wanting to continue litigation or holding back on litigating because they're not sure of the uncertainty. I know that the real estate market is getting hit pretty hard right now with mortgage companies canceling mortgage commitments in the middle of a transaction for people who are trying to buy a house due to various reasons, whether they've tightened their lending requirements suddenly, or those who apply for mortgages have simply lost their jobs, or people trying to pull out of transactions because it's like, hey, I don't know if I want to buy a house right now. I think I want to just hold on to cash. So it's changed very quickly, very significantly over the only in a matter of a couple weeks. A lot of the courts are closed right now, so a lot of things are kind of on a standstill or kind of in limbo. Certain matters are being heard by video conferencing to a very limited capacity. The courts, attorneys, clients, litigants, all of us, just everybody at every stage of the whole process is just trying to pivot and adjust in a very quick manner, and that adjustment still continues on until this day.
Now, was that part of your legal studies as well? I'm sure they had a class on how to pivot during these crises in law school. No.
Absolutely not. Actually, what's interesting about law school is that they don't really um, have classes on law firm management unless you really take it as an elective. And if you take it as elective, it might be one class, maybe two. And there's only so much you can learn in one class or two. I don't think anybody anticipated this kind of crisis. I don't think that that law school in general doesn't really teach you how to run a practice. Unless you really go out of your way and sign up for an elective about maybe law firm management or something along those lines. I think the assumption is that a lot of law students aren't are going to try to get jobs at law firms, get some experience before they decide, if they ever decide to go solo. Um, and I think that's part of the reason. But even if they had a whole program about being a solo attorney, I don't think anybody would anticipate it for this. In general, law school doesn't really teach you how to be an attorney. They teach you how to read the law and how to apply the law to the facts. And they just give you a foundation to run with.
So let's walk through your journey because right now you're obviously a lawyer practicing out of
Mhm.
New Jersey. You passed the bar, obviously. So let's roll it back a couple years before you actually went into law school. And I see that based on your website, you studied you got a master's in diplomacy from the best school ever, right in the United States, which is Seton
Best
Hall.
damn, the best damn diplomacy school ever. Well, that was, it took me back many years. Believe it or not, that was. It was many years because I did get my master's degree in international relations and diplomacy with a concentration in negotiations and conflict management. That was the I participated in a 5 year program, so I was essentially still a kid in the graduate program in the evening, and undergraduate student in the during the day, starting my junior year. Um, and I sort of saw an opportunity and took it and left there with my master's degree. Um,
Smart move,
Even
by the
then,
way.
though, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like saved a lot of time. But even then, like I always knew I just wanted to be an attorney. I don't know um, what kind of drove me to that decision ever since I was even before college. I just knew I wanted to be an attorney. I think it was the idea of protecting people who couldn't otherwise be protected, or being a voice for and defending people who are otherwise feel they cannot be defended. And I'm all about equity and fairness. I think that's just how I've been. If I saw something that just didn't feel fair, didn't feel right, I always wanted to maybe do something about it, or change it, or help change the tide. And so I think with that kind of personality trait, I think that's what led me to the idea of, I can make some sort of impact in that way by being an attorney and fighting for that fairness on behalf of others. And that's sort of what kind of led me to this path.
So, did you ever see some type of injustice in history or in the past where you were studying or you were getting your master's at Seton Hall? Did you see any injustices that kind of just shook your vision or your path to go into law school?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. I mean, one of my favorite topics that I studied was human rights, and human rights in various parts of the world and certain parts of the countries. And you see how there's a large disparity based on race, religion, culture, language, um, sex preferences, or sexual orientation, so on and so forth. And I think that kind of comes into the fairness of why does one government get to treat another group of people unfairly or unjustly based on what language you speak, or what religion they follow, or anything of those sorts. So I think that studying international relations and studying that on a more of a on a global scale kind of played into it, a whole idea of, okay, I like the idea of fairness and equity and equality. Well, then let's get into a topic that kind of touches that more on a global level, because we are a global society at the end of the day. Even if I'm now an attorney in North Jersey, we still live in a global society. We still see injustices on a day-to-day basis, and if we can't address it on a global level, you could at least start in your local community and go from there. And I mean,
Yeah.
even on a local level, there's still a lot of injustices, and you see it every day with the way our justice system treats people unfairly, the way the justice system a disparity with incarceration. Very recently, for example, New Jersey had bail reform, where now if you are arrested and processed to the county, there's no bail reform. You either are remanded, which means that you stay in jail until your court date, if maybe you're considered dangerous or you have a history or whatever else, or you're released on your personal recognizance, and then you're expected to show up in court. But there's no monetary bail, and I think that change. What led to that change was the idea that a lot of the poor people who are getting arrested could not afford to post bail, and therefore had to stay in court until their trial date, only on the basis that they didn't have money to post bail, or they didn't have anybody to post bail on their behalf.
So,
So
sorry to interrupt you, because this is very interesting. So, bail reform. You mentioned that the bail reform, and I'm not too familiar with that. So, walk me through that. The bail reform that they created, that they established right now, they approved or whatever. You're saying that they can't use cash to get out of jail. Is that what you're saying?
So the old system was that you get arrested and the judge might set bail. Okay.
Okay.
And
Yep.
depending on the nature of the crime, the judge will set a monetary bail, or maybe reduce it to 10%. And then you post that bail with a bail bondsman or with the court, and then you're released.
For
And
sure.
then if you do not show up to the court date, you lose that bail. You forfeit it. It's almost like a deposit, right?
Yep.
So here comes. So now we have bail reform, and the whole premise to the whole bail reform was that those who were underemployed, unemployed, or didn't have the money to post bail really had no other choice but to maybe wait for their trial date. So there's a disparity between those who were arrested and had the money to post bail and those who were arrested who couldn't afford it. So now New Jersey eliminated the monetary bail. Now that there is no monetary bail, you simply go to a bail hearing, and the judge will either decide to keep you in because of your past history or the nature of the allegations, if they're serious, if you're considered a danger to society, or the judge will just set you on your own personal recognizance with your new court date and with the expectation that you'll show up to court. And if you don't show up to court, obviously, then warrant for your arrest is issued. So even at the local level, there's like a disparity with equality and fairness and so on and so forth. And so that's happened very recently in the state of New Jersey. I think there's pros and cons to each situation, but I think that's a step in the right direction. It's not a perfect system, nevertheless, but I think it sort of levels the playing field in a lot of ways.
Okay, so the pros and cons. So you're saying that it's although it may suck for a lot of individuals that you pretty much highlighted, but it kind of levels up the playing field to maybe those individuals that do have the cash flow or do have the money, the wherewithal to actually make that bail. So they are that also applies to rich people as well, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. So it applies across the board, and
Okay.
so now the next level of uh, disappropriateness, as I would put it, is those who could afford private lawyers and those who can't, because that's always going to be a never-ending debate. You know, you have the public defender's office that, in a criminal justice system, that there's just a handful of attorneys, limited budget, and they're representing individuals or individuals who cannot afford their own legal representation in the criminal system. And then you have those who can't afford their own private attorneys to do that. So that's, I think that's another level of addressing that part of it as well. Um, but I don't think it's ever going to be a perfect system, nevertheless. But I think there's ways to sort of address it. I think before this whole coronavirus situation happened, um, I mean, there was discussion about maybe increasing the funding for the public defender's office or for organizations that represent indigenous individuals to give everybody fair and legal representation. Now, with the whole coronavirus situation, I anticipate, well, not anticipate, I'm certain that it's going to affect state budgets and there isn't going to be any money allocated to these type of programs for a very long time, which is concerning because
Hmm.
we don't know when we're going to recover economically. We don't know when we're going to recover on a small business scale or a large business scale, or when people are going to be able to find work again. Everything's kind of up in the air, and it's we have yet to see the even larger impact of the coronavirus. Once the coronavirus goes away and it's safe to go outside, then what? We are going to have to slowly go back to living normally, and with that, rebuilding the economy. And that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen for a very long time. And how's that going to affect these type of programs for these type of individuals is yet to be seen.
And obviously, clear. I was about to say clearly, but I'm assuming that this has impacted your practice slightly. The coronavirus.
It has because again, I mean, right off the bat, a lot of courts were closed or put on pause. A lot of matters have been pushed off or rescheduled a couple months out. Um, Clients have been impacted either by losing loved ones with coronavirus, and now they're just kind of contending with that, or losing their jobs and just trying to figure out where things are. I represent a lot of landlords and tenants. Where now I'm getting a lot of calls about, well, what happens if the tenant cannot pay my rent? And there's this executive order that says that there's no evictions, or on a tenant side, well, even though there's an executive order to help homeowners with their mortgages, there really isn't an executive order to help us renters other than we won't be evicted. So if I don't pay rent for this month and the following month and the third month, well, let's say everything reopens in the fourth month. Is the landlord going to come knocking on my door asking for 4 months of rent up front? That issue hasn't really been addressed yet. And I would anticipate that Governor Murphy here in New Jersey should address that issue. maybe at some point when things start to look on the up and up. But this is going to have a severe impact in that realm as well. In terms of affecting business generally, I think everybody's being impacted by it. I think there's always certain types of industries um, that kind of thrive in situations of crises and
Yep.
so on and so forth. I imagine that bankruptcy attorneys are probably getting a lot of calls. I've been getting a few more calls lately about um, people asking me to write their wills and that sort of thing because people are kind of concerned and afraid of what might happen. I've been seeing an uptick in some first responders or healthcare workers looking for a will because they're on the front lines every day and they just don't know what's going to happen and they want to make sure that their um, assets are taken care of. And the interesting part is that a lot of these calls are from people that are our age group that are in the medical field, for example, that they didn't think about this kind of scenario. They didn't think about the exposure. They didn't think that, hey, I might be going to work today, I might catch something, and I might be dead next week. That's a very scary thought.
It is definitely. So
Yeah.
you right now you're switching, you're pivoting your practice per se to manage that workload.
Yeah, because some work has kind of dissipated, and while it's dissipated, you know you get other types of calls in. I've written wills before. It's been a part of my practice, so it's something that I'm comfortable doing. But for example, bankruptcy is something that I don't do. I've never handled bankruptcies. I never thought about it making a part of my practice, nor do I have any interest in it because you can only do so much as a solo attorney. Um, but I'm not going to get into it right now on the last minute where people are expecting immediate bankruptcy filings.
Yeah.
I would just rather refer to somebody who does that kind of work. I do believe
Yeah.
that in any business, you do kind of have to be a little fluid. You kind of have to move where the market is moving, so to speak, right? Like if the market is adjusting or your client base is adjusting, then you also have to make adjustments to the extent that you can
Correct.
without really dilute your brand or diluting your product or diluting your services.
That's true. So I know we'll circle back to that, but I wanted to touch base on a little bit more on your experiences, especially because I see that you work at the public defender's clinic while you were going in law school, right?
Yeah, so that was a very interesting experience because I signed up for the public defender's clinic for credit. We did that kind of that work under supervision of the public defender's office, which was out in Michigan. And when I went there, it was just sort of like you go in, it's like, okay, here's the files, go read them, and then go see these people in jail and then give them legal advice. It's like, wait, what? Hold on. I was like, they throw you right into the fire. It's like, okay. I remember my first. I remember one. I remember a couple of cases from that scenario. I think one particularly had an impact on me that I don't think I'll ever forget. So there was this person who had a history of drug abuse,
Okay.
mainly heroin, and they were pretty much a repeat offender. So in this situation, the person um, stole some items from another person, electronics and sorts. And when I interviewed him, he says, I was basically hungry, and I knew I shouldn't have done that, but I just needed money because I was hungry and I wanted food, and I'm on the streets, I'm homeless, and I have this problem, and I've always had this problem. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, what about maybe drug treatment? He goes, well, the problem is I'm in and out of jail. When I'm in jail, there really isn't much treatment there. And when I get out of jail, it's my weakness, and I'm surrounded by other people in the streets, and this stuff is available to a lot of people who live on the streets, and I sort of get dragged back into it. It's like, and I just sort of want to break the cycle, but I don't have the available resources to do so. So meanwhile, because he allegedly committed this crime, he was declared to be a repeat offender, and based on sentencing guidelines, he was looking at a lot of time away in prison. So we go to the hearing, and at the hearing, the prosecutor is basically saying, this guy needs to be put away. I think they were looking at basically the rest of his life in prison. Right? He was already
Jeez.
older in age, and they're looking at 15 years, but he wouldn't have survived 15 years, right? So basically, they're trying to lock him up for the remainder of his life. And I made the argument, so look, Judge, yes, he's gone back and forth to prison due to drugs. Yes, he has allegedly committed an act. You know, yes, there's substantial evidence for the state to prove their case. But what are we doing here? Does this person need to go back to prison, or does this person really need drug treatment? And I think that if we basically, I argued for a much lesser prison sentence, but I also argued for mandatory drug treatment. Like you get him inside of drug treatment, so we're not back in this cycle over and over again. And of course, the prosecutor was saying, "Well, we're not going to be back in the cycle because we're putting him away for 10 to 15 years, and that's it. We're done with him." And it was a sort of back and forth, and I just said, "Look, I don't think that's really the way to do it. I think in part why he is a habitual offender is because the system failed him. Is because there was a lack of treatment. And if this person, and if there was more access to treatment and more access to addressing the core issues as to why people are on drugs and steal to support their habits or steal to, um, you know, find some money to get something to eat. And I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying that the foundation of the issue really needs to be addressed. So in the end, um, surprisingly, my argument prevailed, and
Nice.
he did get some time in jail in prison because he did do what he did, um, but it wasn't anything near what the prosecutor's office was looking for. It was maybe just a couple of years and continued mandatory drug treatment. On the condition that if he stops the drug treatment, then he might be going back to prison for a significant time. And unfortunately, I don't know what the end result of that was because by then I had already graduated, and I tried to follow up, but I couldn't really get any information because then I wasn't in a public defender clinic anymore. So it wasn't like I could call up and get that confidential information. But that was an interesting experience. I think in that experience, most of the clientele that I've dealt with did have drug problems and were just in and out of the system. And so it was a lot of, just felt kind of like almost responsible, saying, okay, well, here's the core issue. Prison is not going to fix it. They're going to go into jail or prison. They're going to come out. They're going to be using again. The drug issue does have to be addressed. It's there. It's on the open. They're using. Yes, it's horrible. But jail is all about rehabilitation. So what are we doing to rehabilitate them? Some certain things cannot, certain people cannot be rehabilitated just by sitting behind bars. There needs to be some sort of support system during or after. There has to be some sort of treatment during or after, whether that's mental health counseling uh, or psychological follow up or psychiatric follow up. Because a lot of people have these sort of mental issues, and
Yeah.
certain people handle their will look for positive ways to change their situation or to address their situation, and some people don't. And some people just turn to horrible things because they just feel like they're losing control. And it's a very sad. It was a very sad thing to see.
Yeah. And it seems that right now a lot of people are actually going through that because of this the coronavirus, right? We're all cooped up in our houses. There, the fear and anxiety is increasing. People are consuming a lot of alcohol. Alcohol sales are up.
Right.
Apparently, domestic violence also has increased as well. I don't have the data on that, but I have read some things like that where now you're with your spouse, and now your spouse that which was may have potentially abused you before. Now you're also being abused a lot more, right? Um, so it seems that that
I,
experience is right.
yeah, I've gotten a few of those calls too for consultations and things where people are getting themselves caught up in situations. But I think it's a couple things. I think one, you hit it on the nail, is that there's been a history of abuse, and now the abuser is in the house, cooped up all day, every day. You're not going to work for 8 hours and then coming home and that abuse is starting. And that's a very unfortunate situation. Any way you cut it. I think the second thing is you have another group where there hasn't been any abuse, but because of the frustration, the stress, and being cooped up in the house, and people are just gnawing at each other all day, and then you have an incident or an allegation. So there is an uptick in that. Unfortunately, I think that maybe the underlying issue is that they just maybe weren't getting along as it is, with just a limited time that spouses or people who live together see one another because of their work schedules or school schedules or whatever it is, and then now they're in each other's faces 8 9 hours, all day every day, and they don't, and it boils over, and they handle the situation that's not desirable nor productive nor positive, and it's getting a lot of people into trouble.
It's like a pressure cooker. It's just you have those pressure cookers that you start cooking it on high temperature, and it's just at some point you hear that sound, right? And I think that's that sound that we're hearing right now, where a lot of people are at risk. Um,
Yeah, but I also think there's a silver lining in all this too, is that people are staying home with their families. Parents are staying home with their kids and spending more time with their kids, because we tend to get so busy with life,
yes,
where we take things for granted. Whether it's visiting your loved ones or spending time with your children. It's like, okay, well, I could do this tomorrow. I could go visit my mother next week. I could go and see my siblings and my nieces and nephews the week after, and then all of a sudden it's all taken away from you. So it's like you also put those things in perspective to see how precious family is, because ironically, the way I see it, you know, jobs have been taken away, business have shut down, supermarkets are very limited, their movement is very limited. But in the midst of all this, you still have what? You still have your family. That has not changed. Just the manner in which you communicate with your family has changed, but
that's
your
true.
family's still your family. You're still there.
That's
And
true.
I think, from your perspective, as to that is the number one thing that doesn't go. Your family will be your family no matter what, right?
That's
And that
true.
doesn't get taken away until everybody's destination is death, right? Because you have life and you have death. So until that time comes where where a person passes away, you still have your family, and it puts in perspective of appreciating your family while they're still here, especially when you see a lot of death now that's happening. There's just people that are just passing away left and right due to COVID-19, um, at a very unprecedented and fast rate, and people you'll never expect to catch COVID-19. I mean, it's not just afflicted upon the medically vulnerable or the elderly. Also, young people, in their 30s and their 20s. I mean, people of all ages getting it and not making it, unfortunately, and that's maybe another silver lining, is to say, we're not going to be here forever, and to appreciate those around you while they're still here, while
That's
you still
true.
can.
Now, on family, I know you're a global citizen. How's your family doing? Because you have family also living across the pond, right? Outside
I
of the
do.
United States.
I have family pretty much all over. Majority of my family overseas lives in Palestine in the West Bank, right outside of Bethlehem, in a small town called Bethir. And I have family living in Jordan. I have some relatives that are scattered in parts of Europe. I have a cousin who has a wife and kids living in Brazil. Um, and then I have my family that lives across the United States. I think it's just difficult for everybody. I think what worries me is that here we are in a society where we think that we're in an advanced society where we have things that are available to us. I think across the globe, though, people we're already struggling, with poverty, with economics, with armed conflict, with occupation, whatever, different types of scenarios, lack of access to healthcare, and then you add the coronavirus to the whole mix, and it's like, okay, now this coronavirus is going to make a what is already a very bad situation a whole lot worse, and in many different parts of the world, across the globe. I mean, this is a pandemic that has taken the world by storm, and I think everybody so far, in terms of my family, I still keep in touch with a lot of people, and they're trying to manage just like everybody else is on a day-to-day basis. That's really all you can do.
And I share one commonality with you, which is the that love for the world, right? The diversity that we have across the world, and I'm glad that you shared where your family, the scope of where your family is right now, all around the world, including Brazil, Bethlehem, Palestine, also Jordan. And I was talking to I had a conversation with another one of my guests was his name is Samuel Badu. He's from Ghana, and we naturally started talking about the perspectives that you brought up right here, where in the United States a lot of people here assume that we had things under control, right? Where we are the United States of America, therefore we have enough wherewithal to manage uh, the economics, the politics, whatever will come under that, right? But across the world, a conversation that in the conversation that I was having with Sam, poverty came up, crisis that came up, any type of crisis, whether it's famine, you know, what else did we speak about? The lack of food, and which is famine. Sorry, but having the lack of access that we have over here, water as well. So we naturally started talking about those things, and he basically said, "Hey, poverty is all about it's all relative, right? Because poverty in Ghana could be very different than what poverty is in the United States." And I said, that is absolutely right, because in Dominican Republic, where my family's from, if you were to go over there on vacation, you may assume and think that people are poor just because they're walking around in sandals, or they're walking around in what looks like uh, a pair of shorts that are ripped up, or t-shirts. But those people are so happy. Number one, the happiness right there. They have their families, kind of like what you pointed out. They have their families. They're not struggling as much as you probably think they are, just because from the outside perspective, you're looking at them like, oh, these people are poor because they're living in shambles. The city is broken down. We could go on and on and on and try to place what we see here in the United States, the cities that we see here, and put that in a different location around the world. And one thing that that came out about in that conversation is the preparedness that people are, the mental preparedness to actually be able to cope um, with the lack of a job, as an example. I know for sure in Dominican Republic, the lack of jobs, it just is a common thread in society. And because people don't have that access that we have here to those jobs, they don't have access to the large capital that we have over here. Because they don't have the large capital over there, they're okay. They're able to manage a little bit more so than the people here. Um, so I just wanted to kind of put that plug in to see what are your thoughts on from a global perspective, right? Because that's what I said. I think you're a global citizen, so
I,
you're able to see it.
I think it really comes down to values, right? It comes down to what people consider valuable to them, or what their values are. You know, when I last time I went to go visit my family in the West Bank, I've noticed this people are they struggle. They struggle with a lot of different things. But let's talk about economics. I mean,
Yeah.
lack of jobs, lack of access to jobs. It's tough. But what do people value there the most? They value family. They value being together. They value. They still even though they don't have much, they still willing to give and give and give and give. So it really depends. So I think a lot of it really just depends on people's value. It depends on, okay, I live in a tough situation, but in my tough situation, I could still find things that make me happy. I could still find things that I find value in. I think here in the United States, we are very consumed with going to the next level, so to speak. Right? We're more consumed with our net income, and how do we make 100,000 into 200,000, and how do we make 200,000 to 500,000, and then how do we make that 500,000 to a million, and so forth. How do I go from renting a regular apartment to a luxury apartment to buy my first house, my second house, to an investment property, and so on and so forth. It's always about looking at that from that perspective, the next level, and that has a lot to do with number one is image, right? It's about, okay, I want to be successful, I have to look successful. I have to look and appear in a certain way, I have to dress in a certain way. So a lot of times I think these are values that people hang on to, and I think when people hold on to these values, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with holding on to those values, um, I think that other aspects of your life kind of might fall to the wayside, where you're not putting an emphasis on the values of my family, or what I have around me, or how do I find happiness in a very tough situation. So that's why I think it all comes down to values, and I think the coming on the values is also a difference in culture, where in different parts of the world you have um, different cultural thoughts or different religious thoughts. And I think everything comes down to all of this. When people have less, they tend to cling on to things that they have.
Mhm.
And this is
Mhm.
why I say, I've said on a global scale, I've always asked the question in having these conversations, why are wars in developing nations the most brutal of wars? You
Is
always hear
I
about.
can you repeat that question again? Why are wars, you said?
So why are wars in developing nations historically the most brutal wars? Where
Okay.
for example, like genocide of Rwanda, people getting hacked to death, and there was a complete genocide, um, or other places where there was these a civil war or a war among two poor nations, because you have people at the political level that says, hey, you have nothing, right? You don't have jobs, you don't have economics, but what do you have? You have your culture, or you have your religion, or you have your ethnic identity, and that group over there is trying to take that away from you. You see, so I think that people kind of attach. They when they have less, they hold on to these things a lot tighter, and then when it's perceived that there's a threat to this, and that another group of people trying to take it away from you, this is why wars tend to be far more brutal, because then it creates this idea of, if they're trying to take my identity away from me, then I need to protect my identity at all costs. And then it also goes the other way. It's like, well, okay, well, they're trying to take our identity away from us. We need to take their identity away from them. So we need to also eliminate them. And this is why these wars are so brutal. But it also comes back down to value, right? They value their identity and their religion and their culture so much. Maybe they in those situations where you have these armed conflicts, obviously they've dealt with it in a very, very, very wrong way. But I think it just comes down to value. So if you are a person in Dominican Republic, and you're poor, you're wearing flip flops and ripped clothes, but happy. Well, I think they're happy because it's like, okay, well, they still have a house, even though the house might be very, very modest. They still have their family around them. They're still
Sure.
surrounded by people that they love and care about, and this is the things that they put the value on. Whereas here, in the U.S., I know a lot of people who, they have a family, they have a wife and kids. Um, they're surrounded by loved ones. They're surrounded by great friends. They're making a lot of money, but they're constantly racking up their brain about, oh, well, now I need to get to the next level, and I'm upset or depressed or I'm stressed out because I cannot get to that next level. It's like, well, why don't you stop and smell the coffee, and first appreciate what you have. Appreciate the foundation that you have. Don't, the things that you take for granted are the things that kind of got you to where you need to be a lot of times, right?
That's true.
So it is a difference in value in how we perceive things. And I think those values just tend to change depending on where you are in the world, depending on where you reside and what you have access to.
I've been thinking that are the values here going to change? Meaning, in Americans, right? The
Mhm.
Are Americans going to start changing their behavior based on these 40 days of lockdown that we've had, compared to other parts of the world where their values may become stronger, because like you said, they value those aspects of life, compared to here it's just they may not.
What I'm really hoping to see is that people do not forget the ones that have kept our country running. Our healthcare workers are on the front lines, whether they are at at a basic doctor's office or working at a hospital. Um, Everyone in the healthcare industry, or a lot more, most in the healthcare industry, are playing a role right now in one way or another in this whole Corona thing. Those that are running our stores and stocking our shelves, those that are um, working in supermarkets, exposing themselves to customers who might have COVID-19 just so we can put food on our table. These are the people that are kind of keeping things a little bit more sane. And while it is still extremely difficult, um, I'm hoping to see that the general public will see that there is value in these workers. Whereas before this whole COVID-19 happened, I think a lot of these people in these positions were unfortunately looked down upon. Especially if you're working in a supermarket or working in the fast food industry or whatever else. It's, oh, you don't want to be, do you want to be successful? You don't want to flip burgers for a living. Well, now those that are flipping for burgers for a living are keeping us running. And now there's this question about, are they essential workers? Are they important? And so every job is important. Every place is important. Ironically, a lot of non-essential businesses are closed, and unfortunately, a lot of those business owners who are non-essential I feel a lot of them had this whole kind of like attitude of looking down on others, maybe. And I'm not, I'm not wishing bad upon those groups of people either. But I'm hoping that there's a silver lining here is that people's views and attitudes will change, and to see that we all have to work together in a society. And depending on the situation, some people are just forced to step up to the plate to help others. Um, I've also seen a tremendous amount of charity work. You open and you read the news or you listen to the news and you hear about this charity work on a national scale with companies donating, personal protection equipment, donating money, donating food, and all these things. But there's also a huge movement in your local communities with people putting uh, bags of basic food items together and delivering to people in need on a weekly basis, and making sure that people are not going hungry or people are not left out in the cold. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, that because these people are volunteering. They don't have to sit back and do that, but they've come together as a community and they're serving their local communities, and that's across the United States. And I'm really hoping that once this whole COVID-19 situation ends, those acts of charities do not end. They continue, because regardless, we're always going to have people struggling in our community, and those who are struggling in our community are going to continue to struggle on a larger scale. And the people who are not used to, who got put in a situation where they have to struggle, they're not going to be struggling. And so, if this whole COVID-19 miraculously disappears, let's say in a month from now, which I don't think is the case, but just as an example, and
Yeah.
there is no signs of coronavirus, you're still going to have this impact on the community. So you're still going to need people to step up and do this kind of community work and community organization and charity work. And so I hope that also continues and that does not change.
I
But
value what
time will tell.
yeah, I value what you said because my mom, she was a cashier for a very long time. She retired, but a lot of people, a lot of folks don't see the value of, well, let me rephrase that. A lot of people in power, they don't see the value that those people have. Obviously, they're there to maintain the business going, the operations going, whether it's a janitor or a cashier. And one thing that I've done personally in any role or position that I've ever been, or with the company, I've always tried to connect with those people because those are the folks that are actually on the boots on the ground, quote unquote, and they are the ones that actually know the operations much more than the people that are far removed. Now, with that being said, there are CEOs out there that are really, really good at actually connecting with those folks that on the ground because they probably started there to begin with. But I wanted to circle back on food. You spoke about food, you spoke about cashiers, and I know that Ramadan is approaching, correct? It's
Right
approaching,
around the corner.
is
Yeah.
is right around the corner, and I think, like I told you before, when I lived in Bosnia in Sarajevo, I also tried Ramadan for a couple of days. Um, how do you think that's going to affect? Oh wait, do you think that coronavirus will affect the Ramadan at all? Because I know food is critical,
It,
right?
it, it, it definitely will. I mean, first and foremost, the mosques are closed, at least here in New Jersey, right? They're not having gatherings for prayers on Fridays, or during or 5 times a day during the day. Um, you know, there are limited activities by video, Zoom and whatever else. So that is so leading up to Ramadan, people tend to get closer to the mosque and get more involved with the community, get prepared. So that already has been impacted. During Ramadan, we have a special prayer called Tarawih that happens every night, for the 30 days of Ramadan. Being that the mosques are closed, obviously, then people are not going to be going to the mosques to take part in those special prayers during Ramadan. And just Ramadan in general is about reflection on spiritual reflection, but it's also getting together with your family. So, my family, every weekend, we're at another relative's house, we're getting together, everybody brings a dish, and we fast together, we pray together. And obviously, with COVID-19, none of that is going to happen either. So, it is going to impact a lot of families. it's gonna. I think that while the community is helping those who are already impacted, we tend to the Muslim community tend to also reach out to their local communities to help people in need during Ramadan as well. Because every Ramadan, even before and after Ramadan as well. I mean, charity is a very big tenet in our faith. I don't think that's going to be impacted. I think, if anything, I anticipate that people are going to step up more to the plate because we're now facing a very unprecedented and challenging time. But I also think that Ramadan at this time during the COVID-19 is great because for us, it gives us an opportunity to reflect on what we already talked about values, right? And what's important in family, and sort of like a reset of coming back to earth and being grounded as to what is, and more importantly, not taking it for granted. Because I mean, Ramadan happens every year, and it comes around quickly. Comes around a lot quicker than we think. It just felt like yesterday. I just went through Ramadan, right? And every Ramadan, you say, okay, well, I'm going to become better maybe next Ramadan. Well, now with COVID-19 and just generally within the past year, how many people that were with us last Ramadan are not with us this Ramadan? A lot, and it
Hmm.
goes back to not taking things for granted and so on and so forth.
Hmm. Now, for whoever's listening, can you let's speak about a little bit more about Ramadan? I know it lasts for 30 days. In the mosques are closed, like you said, in New Jersey. How is it the experience going to change, or the people how people are going to be bonding? Because I know that, like you said, that this is a time to reflect, but people, Muslims will go to the mosques, and that's going to change. Has
Yeah, but I think people will pray at home. I mean, you still can at home.
Yep,
I think the reflection is your connection with God or a connection with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and that doesn't change because you're still kind of whether you're reflecting about that at the mosque or at home. I think that part's going to change. I mean, people will still try to try to reflect and connect and during Ramadan. Um, whether they're at the mosque or not. I just think with the Tarawih prayer, like people, kind of congregate to pray together at for Tarawih, but that's something that can be done at home. You're just not congregating in large groups of people, obviously for the safety due to COVID-19. Um, but in terms of, excuse me,
they're fine.
yeah, in terms of everything else, I mean, well, we just have to, in terms of connecting with our family, we just have to use the available resources for now. I think that we should actually be grateful that we have Zoom and we have phones, we have iPhones. Let's say if the coronavirus happened, a century ago,
Oh my
people would
gosh.
be more isolated. Yeah, people would be far more isolated from one
Yeah,
another because there is no means of connecting with one another and everything else. The fact that you and I could video chat so quickly in real time, and you're in Ohio and I'm in New Jersey, and
that's
then we
true.
could add people across the world is a miraculous of in itself, right? Like we take these things for granted, but I think that we just have to use what's available to us, and I think safety is our number one priority, and I think this is what needs to be done.
So fasting is part of the Ramadan, and after you fast, you gotta obviously eat, right? What are the one of the your favorite meals to eat to make?
Oh man, during Ramadan.
Yeah,
That's
you know
really
me. You
that's
know me.
my favorite.
You
Yeah.
know me. I have to talk about food at some point.
You know me, I love to eat. Um, during Ramadan, I mean, it's just it's well. First of all, let me explain to you this.
Let's go. Do it.
Ramadan isn't it's a time where you're fasting from sunrise to sunset, and when sunset comes, you're just gorging on food, right?
Thanks for clarifying that. Yep,
It's yeah, it's not about like okay, time it's sunset. Let's go fill our stomachs till the brim until our stomachs hurt. It's not really about that either. But of course, um, you know, first of all, it's a reflection of being thankful even if you have food on the table because a lot of people do not have that luxury of having food on the table. Um, I think in terms of my favorite things to eat, honestly, I try not to be too picky. And the reason why I try not to be too picky is because, for example, growing up, if my mother was fasting and cooking in the kitchen, try not to be too picky about what you put on the table because it's like, okay, you're either going to eat what's on the table or you're not eating at all. So you, yeah, I mean, but my favorite, I mean, my tastes vary. I love all kinds of food. I think for traditional Middle Eastern dishes, stuffed grape leaves is something that comes to mind. Um,
Ooh, okay.
yeah, that's something that's like completely out of this world. Um, there's another dish called sahan. It's like baked bread and onions with spices called samak and chicken, and it's just the way everything just comes together. The flavor that comes together is just kind of like my mouth is watering right now. Like I just,
I think the way that
uh,
I saw it in your eyes, the way you started describing it, is
and,
just like
oh
this must
man,
be good.
you know what? When you come to New Jersey, let me know ahead of time.
Okay.
I will show you first.
So all right, so you have stuffed grape leaves. The how do you pronounce the baked bread again?
Imsachan.
Emsahan.
You almost got it. Imsachan.
Emsahan. All right. I don't I'm Sahan. Is that on is can I buy it?
If you go to a real Middle Eastern restaurant in Ohio, just walk in there and be like, "Do you have sakhan?" I think one, they'll look at you wide eyed like, "How do you know that?" And two, but if you ever when you come visit New Jersey, let me know, and we will get it done. I will show you firsthand what a sakhan is. I'll get it done.
I think I found it online. All right, one more. Give me one more. I know you gave me the stuffed grape leaves. You gave me the Sahan. One more.
Another Middle Eastern dish. Basically, Mahshi is one that I really enjoy, which is basically stuffed zucchini, stuffed eggplant, stuffed green peppers, and it's all like put in a pot and cooked in a tomato type of broth,
Yeah.
and that's also one of my
So
favorite dishes. But
so
we also have people who make very, very, very traditional dishes, especially when they invite other people over. So, for example, there's a very traditional dish that's very popular in Jordan and in Palestine called Mensaf.
mhm.
Mensaf is like lamb and rice. There's some bread on the bottom, and there's a yogurt sauce, and that is like a very, very traditional dish that people make when you're inviting people over. Um, or when there is a very traditional type of gathering or gathering with family, and is something that's very commonly made during Ramadan as well, especially when you're inviting other people over, or if you're going to a massive gathering of breaking fast. A lot of times you'll see mensef being served on the menu, and using lamb, for example, it's expensive, right? It's one of the more expensive meat, so it's almost like a lot of times it's considered as like you're honoring your guests by serving some sort of like a whole lamb or something, right? It's something that is showing respect to those who have come to accepted your invitation, um, honoring your guests or honoring your community by making a dish like this. So this is also something that is commonly seen during Ramadan.
That's interesting.
Now,
The respect. Go ahead.
yeah, and that's just what it is now in other parts of the world. So let's say if you're from, I have a lot of Pakistani friends, and a lot of friends from India. I have a lot of friends from other parts of the world that are also Muslim. They have other dishes and things, and I've been to their gatherings in past Ramadans, um, where their foods are very different, or they also put an emphasis on eating before sunrise, right? So a lot of times people get up before sunrise and they get together to have a meal before the sun rises, before the fasting begins. And I've noticed that a lot of my Pakistani friends and their families put emphasis on this, and they get up together or they stay up all night, and they get together as a family in the pre-dawn meal and in the after dawn meal as well. Um, with all the traditional foods. I mean, I can't really recall a lot of different types of curries, sauce-based dishes, um, kebabs. Um, you know, very good food. I mean, I couldn't really tell you what the names were. I was just like, okay, this all looks good. Let me have some.
I want to share something with you, and I want to hear your thoughts on that, your opinion on it. So I went to Hong Kong, China, a couple years ago, and I was so familiar, or I thought I was familiar with Chinese food, right? What Chinese food is served over here, which is good. The Chinese food they have in the U.S. But when I went to China, in Beijing, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, it was just food. There was no Chinese food, right? But the food that I had over there blew my mind. It was so delicious. They started off they introduced us into their culinary experience that we had with basic meal. The first meal was basically white rice, and it had minimal flavor. And I was I was perplexed. I was like, wait a second, I'm in China. I'm assuming that this is not typical, but then they explained to us that throughout the 14 days that we were there, they didn't want to they didn't want to throw everything at us at one time. So they started giving us food that was bland in flavor. Because by the time we got to like day two, day three, day four, that's when they started actually giving us traditional Chinese meals. And oh my God! By the time we were leaving, we had this. By the time we left, we weren't even questioning what it was because sometimes we couldn't tell what it was. But like you said, it looked good, it smelled good, it tasted amazing. And the last meal in Hong Kong before we left, it was a lobster with cheese. And yeah, that's the same thing I thought. I was like, what, lobster and cheese? But I knew better. This is the day 14. I'm not gonna question it. It's just gonna taste amazing, dude. I stuffed myself with that damn lobster and cheese because it was delicious.
First of all,
Apart,
when you say cheese, when you think of cheese, you don't associate it with um, Asian food necessarily, right? Like Chinese food. Like I can't remember ever going to a Chinese restaurant and seeing something on the menu with cheese on
and
it. Ever.
we were saying that throughout the 14 days that we were there, we didn't see cheese a lot. Why? Right? Because there it's not there, right? It's just but when we saw it in the middle of the plate with this lobster, we went all in because we're like, we haven't seen cheese in so long.
And
But the
lobster, right? Lobster's good too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess what I'm trying to say is another thing too is that I don't see a lot of Dominican restaurants, which is okay with me because Dominican food is amazing. And when people get when restaurants get access to food and they start putting their own twist to it, it may taste great, but you're probably fucking up the what is a traditional plate. So I guess the question to you is, Middle Eastern food is amazing. I've never been to the Middle East. I've never been to Jordan or Palestine, but I'm assuming if I were to go there, which I hope to go there in the future, my mind is going to be completely blown away with the flavors and the tastes and the textures.
I think so. I think that in general, when you go to a Middle Eastern restaurant, I think the focus is on almost like barbecue, right? Like your kebab and your shish kebabs and your chicken kebabs with rice and with salad and with hummus and everything else. It's like kind of staring thing, and these are things that we don't really make at home. These are things that you make on a barbecue grill, right? And how often do you have a barbecue? You know, some people have barbecue more often than others. I think in the past maybe a couple of years, you're starting to see restaurants, at least here in North Jersey, that do make a more traditional food, but it's not like it's something different on the menu every day, right? Because now more and more people want access to it. So, for example, I mentioned earlier Mensaf, the lamb dish, right? That's very traditional. Well, now you could go to a some restaurants and now they'll make it because making Mensaf is very time consuming. Or um, you don't have the time to make it. You could order it in advance. Whereas before, it would just really be focused on the shawarma or the kebabs and so on and so forth. But one trend that really bothers me.
There you
Okay, I'm
go.
going to go on a bit of a rant
No, no, let's do it.
is this whole platters thing. So I don't know if you're familiar um, about this platters that got popular in New York, right? It was like a little cart, one of those street carts, and every time you go there, there's this line that just goes down the block, and it's like this lamb and chicken and rice, and then you wait online and it's cheap, and you're open late. And so if you're out at a club or at a bar, and that's where people would come out of the clubs and bars at 2 or 3 a.m. and wait in this line to buy these platters. And then that's how it kind of got popular. Then
What's
you
the name of
start
the
seeing
platter?
it pop up.
What's
It
the name of
doesn't
the?
really have a name. It's just like you go to like it doesn't really have a name, but it's just like lamb and rice platter or just
Okay.
platters.
Okay.
So, so now what I'm starting to see is that a lot of places are a lot of brick and mortar stores are opening up and offering this food and calling it Middle Eastern food, and
Ah,
only sort of limiting our cuisine to this platters. And it's like, well, this isn't really Middle Eastern. This isn't really our food's more complex than that. It's more flavorful than that. It's more time consuming than that. So I just feel like it's sort of, in a way, reduced our whole idea of a culinary experience where now a person goes into one of these places, orders a lamb and rice platter, and says, "Oh, I had Middle Eastern food." It's like, no, you did not have Middle Eastern food. When you eat Mensah, tell me you had Middle Eastern food. When you have sahan, then you can tell me you had Middle Eastern food. When you had these platters, you had something that was created in New York that's perceived to be Middle Eastern. So that's what and and I've tried it. I've given it a chance. I've one time, one and only time I went to New York with a group of friends. We waited on this line. We ordered. We ate. I'm like, "Oh, Rami, what do you think?" I'm like, "I can't believe I came all out to New York, the culinary capital of the world, to eat this." Like, well, I have access to it, right? Don't get me wrong, but it's like I don't see the big deal in it. Like, I'm not going to make a special trip to New York to buy this. I just want it. And then it started coming across the bridge into New Jersey, and so now it's becoming more popular. But I personally just don't see the hype in it.
yep.
And I just get really where it's like, oh, it's Middle Eastern food. It's like, no, it's not. Like, let me show you what Middle Eastern food is.
Dude, I
But I guess
gotta.
everybody has
You guess what you said? You guess what?
everybody has their taste, I suppose. But that's just my whole take on that.
No, no. I think I think the cultural experience that you just mentioned is highly important. Have you ever been to Louisiana at all?
I haven't.
Man,
I'd love to go
when
though.
you have to go whenever all this stuff clears up. And the reason why I'm talking about Louisiana with the food is because food is highly important over there. Food is highly important in Louisiana. So this will be the last thing I'll mention before we wrap up because I know you're a busy man. But Louisiana, right? So my first time I went over there, I bought a jambalaya. I bought a jambalaya
Okay.
in a to go place because I didn't know where else to actually buy food. I knew that they had great food, but I went to a place that had pre-wrapped meals. So I was like, oh, pre-wrapped meal, it must be great. And it's a
Mhm.
healthy location. So I was like, oh, healthy jambalaya to go. Let's do it. When I met up with my client, he asked me, "So, where have you eaten?" He's taking me to lunch, and
Okay.
every time I went over there, he's taking me to lunch or dinner, and because it's all about the experience over there. Over there is all about family, food, and work. It's not work, family, and food. Is family and food is important. So I'll tell him about the place. I found a healthy location that sells the jambalaya. He's like, "Stop, stop! I'm gonna stop you right there." I'm like, "Why? What happened?" He's like, "That's an oxymoron. You cannot eat a healthy jambalaya. You cannot eat a healthy anything in Louisiana." And I was like, "What do you mean you can't?" So I explained to him, and I was like, "If you want, we could go buy this." He's like, "No, I am not gonna go buy a healthy jambalaya." He walked me through the process of how you make a jambalaya, and that process, I was like, "You're absolutely right." Another thing too is there's a lot of places that have been selling Louisiana dishes over here in Ohio as well. I question it because I've tasted it. It's complex, it's flavorful, like you said, and it's just you can't. As hard as you try, unless you really know it, it's hard to make, and it's hard to actually deliver on the same experience that you had before. So, my friend, I know you got to go. I know you're a busy man, so thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, the Conversation Podcast. You could always find the Conversation Podcast on either Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Rami Saleh, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, and we got to do this again soon. It was
All
a
right,
really good experience.
you're
Thank you for
always
having me.
welcome.
Thank you. Take
Yep.
care. Be safe.